friends of Taunton Bay. This is a privilege to be here. My name is Dwayne Shaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Downeast Salmon Federation. And actually we have one of our board members here tonight, George Langbaugh. George. We're also a grassroots organization based in Washington County, but our region extends into Hancock County, so we say we operate from the Bagadoos, which is on the Penobscot, to the border. So the work that we do is the watershed work, primarily focused on sea-run fisheries, but it's a community process of community participation in sea-run fisheries, recovery, management, and long-term sustainability. We have a number of programs that we run, and I'll talk more about that. One of which has been working in Taunton Bay, really focused on smelts. So I'm going to go into the life history of smelt, rainbow anadromous, which means sea-run smelt. These guys are like a little, almost like a little salmon that they have to come to fresh water to spawn. They go out to sea to mature, and they're an iconic species in the sense that they're really deep into the heritage. If you go into if you look at the Penobscot calendar, for instance, Penobscot tribe calendar, the month of April is the smelt month. So that's when they first start to show up. It's a food sustenance fishery for lots of people, and the Penobscots, Passamaquoddies, have been deeply interested in this species as well. So there's been a lot of research underway, and then we as a community-based group have been employing the sort of process of community science or citizen science to gain more information than any agency could possibly do on their own. So Downeast Salmon Federation was formed in the early 80s to promote better management of Atlantic salmon. Videographer.
No, people can't see it.
Where should I go?
That's better. That's good.
Not better? Okay. So we're focused, the primary focus was on Atlantic salmon, but we're focused on what is now an endangered species. The Atlantic salmon, when we get started in the 80s, was a recreational fishery, very popular recreational fishery. Downeast, Maine was the last place where there was a recreational fishery up until about 99, 2000, when it got listed as an endangered species. So that brought us into a whole discussion about ecosystem in the context in which these fish survive, which is smelter food fish for Atlantic salmon as well. So they're, as we know, ecosystems are interwoven. Here's our center in Columbia Falls, and you see we started out with an empty, actually the building we took an old hydroelectric dam which had failed to operate and failed to pass fish by it, and turned it into an outreach and education center and hatchery. And brought my pointer with okay, next slide. So this is Columbia Falls, and we encourage everyone, of course, to come and visit. What we do is we collaborate with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Craig Brook National Fish Hatchery. We bring eggs into our hatchery and stock them out into the Pleasant River in this case. But we're also involved in Arguegas, Machias, Pleasant, the so-called wild salmon rivers in eastern Maine have been our primary focus. Most recently, we've been very involved with the Union River, which, of course, as we've heard, is Frenchman Bay Conservancy territory as well. So as fisheries biologists, we have now 5 biologists on staff and a couple of administrative people, and we're focused on a number of different projects and species in different ways. Next slide. We operate what's called the Downeast Rivers Land Trust. There wasn't a land trust that was really focused on the interior of Washington County when we got started, and we were particularly interested in the riparian zones along the rivers, so we ended up creating a land trust specifically to focus on those areas, and this is just an illustration of some of our focus areas. Next, please. And then most recently we've started this with another former power plant on the banks of the East Machias River. We did a dam removal there, which was an abandoned, what we call deadbeat dam. And there's lots of deadbeat dams around that we would like to see addressed for the purposes of recovering our ecosystem. And that's a fisheries center where we have something called the Peter Gray Conservation Hatchery, which is a replica of a hatchery from the Tyne River in England, North England. So again, put that on your bucket list of places to visit and come find us. Next
And
one.
you can come actually next week.
That's right.
Right, this will be a good time.
Medea Simon, who's my partner, and owns a home here in Hog Bay area, and a board member here is prompting me along as we go. So we have an open house at this center on the 16th, and we've got a musician coming in, and there are about 200,000 endangered Atlantic salmon being raised there right now. Next slide. So here we are talking about smelts, and this is eastern Maine and central coast of Washington County is the last place where you can commercially harvest smelt in the United States. So it's over the period of time they've been, and I have a few more slides, but constricted in their abundance to particular places. Taunton Bay happens to be a very productive place as we've found, and I'll talk more about what we found this spring. So these are little smelts. This stream's about 3 feet wide, and there's a smelt. He's about 8 inches or so, and they're all teamed up together. It's like literally you could walk across them. There's so many, right? It's a 3-foot stream, so it's not that big. But here from the Pleasant River, you see these fish being caught in gill nets. And
Do you invite Steve, would you
Oh,
like to
sorry.
sit over here? There's a seat here, Steve.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Excuse me. So people harvest smelts in many different ways, and little dip nets in the spring, and that's what you see happening around Taunton Bay a lot in many different streams. Next slide. And of course, they're important species for all kinds of critters. Next slide. Not many of them survive to be destroyed. You know, I was looking at that, trying to determine if that's a mink or an otter, and I think it's a mink, but I'm not 100% sure. Of course, a small otter and a big mink are quite similar. Life cycle of rainbow smelt. So they come up into the streams to spawn. The eggs are sticky. They stick to the rocks or the vegetation. They incubate for about 2 weeks, depending on water temperature. They hatch and they drift downstream out into the estuary. And they're minuscule. So they're the size, less than the size of pencil lead in dimension. So very tiny little eggs, translucent. If there's enough of them, they look yellow, and we've seen enough of them actually in Hog Bay this spring, where you could see mats of them. So a couple of years later, so sexual maturation, year 2, they come back, and they can live for many years after that. So they repeat spawn. They don't die after they spawn like Pacific salmon do. Next slide. Research underway. This is research that we helped with in taking samples that were then sent to geneticists. And what you see is that there are different distinct populations along the coast. Some are blended, some are very distinct and isolated. So Cobscook Bay, for instance, is what this is representing here. And then the mid area of Hancock County, and then it starts to blend into Penobscot Bay. Seems to have its own distinct population. But what this mentions is the Gulf of Maine currents tend in this direction. So these fish are drifting down in this way. So. And of course, Cobscook and Passamaquoddy is very isolated, especially Cobscook. Next. Sampling sites, so this is for baseline long-term data on smelt in the last 10 years or so. These sites have been set up where this fyke net is set up, and as the fish migrate up into the stream, they go through a funnel, and they end up stuck in there like a big minnow trap. And then they can be sampled for age distribution, how many repeat spawners do you have, and what's the size and total abundance and timing of the runs and all of that. So there's a number of places being better baseline, but as you see, as you get further east, there's fewer of them. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, we'll talk about that in a minute, but in Maine, East Bay Brook, Cobscook, Shopee Brook, Jonesboro, Tannery Brook, up in the Penobscot, which is up near Bucksport, and then some others further down. And by far, these places are much more abundant than anywhere else. Next one. So how do we go from just a few sample sites where that we know will be long-term data collected there over time by Department of Marine Resources to going out and looking at multiple places where you do that with citizen science? That's the best way to do it. Everybody has a camera in their pocket these days, and we're finding some really interesting things through this process. So we've initiated the process in Eastern Maine in response to the threat that the state and federal government may choose to close down the fishery altogether. So DSF jumped in at that point and said, well, wait a second, we think that there are a lot of fish here. We need to document it in order to keep the fishery open. So we go to the next slide, and we'll hone in. Okay, I forgot about this here. Two zones. Historic range, shrinking range. Is this climate change? Is it pollution? Is it a combination of those things? Is it overfishing? Is it invasive predators taking their toll? Is certainly pollution, certainly impacts of sedimentation on habitats, certainly culverts, and we'll talk more about that. But even here in Cape Cod, there's just a few streams left in Massachusetts now that have any smelts, not of any number at all, just handfuls of smelt. And same in New Hampshire. Southern Maine is now under further restrictions as of this spring. And actually last year it started, but it's been instituted into statute now. Next slide. So these are cold water fish, closely related to salmon and trout. So with climate change, we think that that's part of the driver. But you see the harvest recorded. This is New Jersey, that far south. And I won't go walk through all of these, but extirpated from New Jersey in 41. Actually, that means none. But they would start to become sort of endangered. So these are old fisheries reports that the information has come through. Sorry about the font of the color. It's not standing out as well. Next one. So this has been moving up the coast. If you look at Massachusetts, 9 million smelt taken from a single river, 2,300 people targeting smelts in a single day on a single river. This is an important species to people. It was, and it can be again. Our belief is that we can turn this around, or at least hold the ground. Next slide. I won't spend a lot of time. Commercial harvest, tanking. Next. So what's the problem? There are some really obvious ones and easy ones to deal with. And this is like many other culverts that you've seen as you drive up and down the road. What's wrong with that culvert? If you were a smelt. Smelts aren't Superman salmon. They don't jump. They swim. They can nudge their way over maybe 4 or 5 inches at the most. But if they're critical habitat, their spawn, if this is the head of tide, which we have a situation exactly like this in Taunton Bay, or Hog Bay, sorry, they can't get up to where they need to go. And then, of course, you've got bigger structures like that are major impediments. Next. So these inventories are being done, and a number of organizations are involved in inventorying culverts or barriers to fish passage. And Eileen is involved with a lot of this work as well. Trout Unlimited, there's a Atlantic Salmon Federation, Maine Audubon, TNC, lots of local groups just like Friends of Taunton Bay. So this was last year actually, so now I think about 70% of the state has been surveyed. and there are crews out right now doing more surveys. Next one, please. Just again showing climate change underway. Next, that was temperature, by the way. And this is an interesting one. This is data that we've collected in the Pleasant River. And what this is these are rainstorms. Sorry, these are rainstorm events. And this is pH. It rains, the pH drops. It rains, the pH drops. It rains, the pH drops. Bang, bang, bang. And look at this big event in October. Massive rain, massive drop, less than 4.5 pH. And this is in the death zone for a lot of fish species. So, and of course this affects marine bivalves as well, those creatures that need calcium in their shells. So we've done this ourselves, documented this, put the data collection device out in the river, and then keyed it in with rainfall. And you see that this is of consequence, we think. Next. So culverts and other habitat degradation. This is a skidder trail across the Smelts stream, Columbia Falls, actually, right off the smelt habitat. Sedimentation coming off of poorly constructed roads. Next. NOAA fisheries declaring that it's a species of concern. Next. Agency rulemaking at the state level about amount of harvest that could happen, and in the context of all this is sort of this urgency to get out there and see what's going on. And here are the current regulations in the zone. So this is the entire coast of Maine. There are 3 different harvest zones. So the Penobscot is its own. Downeast remained as is. That's 2 quarts a night per licensed angler, and some limited commercial harvest and ice fishing in the winter as well. Okay. This again just showing those 3 zones. Next. So, what are some of the things that we need to do? Expand research, management actions around the fishery, restore habitats, continue monitoring, and potentially some limited stocking and marking by, this is probably a DMR project that may happen in the future. Okay. The commercial fishing zone, it's essentially from East Machias to Taunton Stream, Steuben. So that is the only region where someone can get a commercial fishing license and go out and harvest in mass smelt. And there's only about 4 or 5 licensed fishermen that do it. And I'm actually one of them. I got a commercial license for research purposes because it was just easier to go out and pay the $110 and do that rather than wait for 3 years for sampling approval. So smelt streams. DMR survey, 71, they did some survey work. They went back in 2009 when things started to look dicey, and next. And then DSF stepped in and started doing some work in 2012, next one. And then in 2014, we extended down to Hancock County and started visiting. So altogether, I think it's about 115 streams that we visited. And what we started doing really this year was to reach out to other groups, like Friends of Taunton Bay. We had training here in Taunton Bay, and we did a training in the Bagaduce area. We did one in Machias, we did one in Cobscook, and people are out there like Mark Harrington and others have been out looking for smelt. Okay, sorry, 2015.
I just added that.
Yep. So you can see the extent of what we can do with just a little bit of non-governmental, this is all non-governmental supplementation to the data. Next. And this is a lot of fun. I mean, you get out, you have to not necessarily go out at night, but if you want to see the smelts moving, they come in at night. I failed to say that earlier. So they come in to spawn at night. but you can see the evidence of them in the daytime. So you can go back in the day and look for the eggs, or you can look for the signs of predation, you know, dead bodies of smelt all over the place, which happens, and I'll tell you a little story about that. And, or the fishing activity, a beaten down trail where you can tell people have been in there dipping smelt. This is just another, so next steps, and this relates to across the board, but Taunton Bay as well, of course. We're continuing this survey. We have managed through the Maine Community Foundation, received some grant money and some other sources that we to hire someone. And that person's looking at not just smelt, so he'll go on into alewives after that, and we'll talk about other species a little bit more. So our target is 150 streams. I think that they're probably closer to 170 streams in that region. Next. Prioritize some projects. And we've done some projects already that are really neat, like Redmond's Creek in Harrington, where we actually went in and purchased the property, protected it. It was the critical habitat and a very, very productive smelt stream. So things like that can be done around Taunton Bay. And it guarantees public access also to access the fish. Next. So here's Redmond's Creek. You can see the beaten down trail, people walking in here. The fish can only migrate up to this ledge drop, which is about 70 yards or less from the head of tide. And they can't get past that. But this place is just absolutely plastered with eggs every single spring, literally an inch thick. So it's, and the black ducks will go in there after the eggs are deposited. They become food as well. So you can walk in and see black ducks gobbling up the eggs. Now here's something that we just discovered last week. This person in Kennebec, on the Kennebec Road in Machias, bought an old house. It was an old rundown house on a tiny little postage stamp lot across from where they lived. And the fellow grew up all of his life catching smelts there. And when that house came up for sale, he said, well, I'm going to tear it down, and I'm going to build a parking spot. I'm going to put some picnic benches in there. I'm going to put up a little sign. It's going to be a smelt access site. So and we went and talked to him and said, we'd like to give you a kiosk to put up there like what we did in Harrington. And he said, well, his wife came out and said, well, why don't I just give you the land? He said, so there we go. That was last week. So, and that's the stream, Kale Brook. That's the first, actually, as a UMM student in 1982, that's the first place I ever went smelting with a couple of my professors from UMM. So it's kind of interesting. Next. So citizen science, what does that mean? It means people get calibrated. We're all looking for the same thing. We're all recording the same information. It's of use. And we've been doing that, as I said, with these trainings that we put together. And it's working. So people, like Mark, discovered some sites, and we'll look at some maps of Taunton Bay in a second. And then the idea of restoration in habitat protection. So acquiring properties with critical habitats so that the skidders don't run through them in the future, or the roads and so on, or the restoration, removing the bad culverts and putting in proper culverts. Next. Outreach and education. So of course, if people don't know about the fish, they're not going to care, and if they don't understand what's involved with maintaining water quality and so on, they just won't know what not to do or what to do. And so we do a lot of outreach work like this, this evening, but we have a big smelt fry. So if you can eat them, people care about them a little bit more. So here's some beautiful smoked smelts right there. These are smoked alewives. This is our smelt fry, where we have hundreds of people come out in the spring and sit down and sort of celebrate the success of sustainable fisheries, which we don't have, of course, that many success stories for sustainable fisheries. So we need more of this, and we think we can move that needle higher and higher with more and more species. Next, just some of the references. And now we're going to go to some interactive maps that we've been putting together, and specifically for Taunton Bay. I should say that Kyle Winslow and Colin Shanklin, who are on our staff, helped to put this together, and Colin is the smelt guy. He's the one going out in the middle of the night, looking for these fish and talking to elver fishermen who are out fishing for eels, as this overlaps. And we also, what I didn't mention is the anecdotal data. So there's the actual data of are there eggs there, relative abundance of fish, but then there's the stories. So the stories are almost as important because that leads us to sort of put it all in context. We're going to zoom in just a bit.
I have to get that key back for those layers.
Orient people to what they're seeing.
So this is Hog Bay here, and Cardinal Stream and the road, Route 200 comes up through here. Downtown Franklin, back in this area. Frank's house.
You told me.
Well, that's nice, Frank.
So we're using the mapping technology and the aerial photography that's available these days. Makes life a lot easier for doing this kind of work and for recording it and sort of archiving it. And we're learning how to do this. So with all of the, say, the culvert or barrier surveys that are being done, so now we can couple that against the actual fisheries surveys and say, well, you know, the fish are going to have a problem on this particular culvert. We've observed it. Not only does it look bad, well, we know it is bad because the fish, we actually see the fish beating their heads against trying to get up through it. So here we are at the very top end of the intertidal zone, the tidal zone. Head of tide is right here for Hog Bay, and Taunton Bay is down below. The tide comes all the way up this creek. These are salt marshes. And then you come to Cardinal Stream, which goes up to Donnell Pond. So these data points are, and we don't have to go into it, but we could, if you click on one of these, the green squares are what DMR did in 1971, and then again in 2009, and then we've been going back in and verifying. Well, look, there's a bluejay.
Okay, so just as an example.
Right, so these are interactive, so you can click on them, it actually gives you information, hard information, and there's even more data behind that, says exactly who went, when they went, what DMR, Marine Patrol officer, and so on. But they don't have the staffing really to do it right, do it as well as it should be done. So that's where we can step in. So for instance, there's a dot like a square like this on Egypt Stream, one of the major trips to this watershed, that says used to sustain major runs of smelt, no longer present, 2009.
We can go look at that.
We can
Do
go
you want
look.
me to turn off these layers now and turn on certain layers?
No, that's okay. I think we'll turn on, why don't we just keep them on for right now?
Okay.
So we can tab through these. But, so this is Johnny's Brook, which comes out of Long Pond and Little Pond and Scudic Bog. So it has 3 tributaries, all with different water quality and probably different ecosystems. But when it piles down together into the head of tide, there's a massive run of smelts here. Probably not, you could say nationally significant. So, and this, even more so. So that's Cardinal Stream. And we went in there this spring, and there were tens of thousands of smelts depositing millions, if not billions of eggs. It's probably the biggest run of smelts it is the biggest run of smelts I've personally observed anywhere, other than through the ice with the net. So on the Pleasant River, it's the only other place where I think there may be a few others that are as equal to this, at least this past spring. So they come up above the head of tide, and they come right up along the Hooper Road, and they're all spawning in this here that's kind of a braided channel there. That comes, the river comes down, it goes through some braids, and it's perfect habitat. Happens to be perfect habitat for tomcod. So this is one of those critical hotspots, ecological hotspots we call them, that if you're going to protect anything, these are important places. So if we zoom out.
Do the smelt get snared by elver traps?
No, they used to, and now they have excluders in those elver
They're
nets.
too big to get.
Yeah, and what those
You
are
get
put out there.
elvers intensely right there.
Right. So the elvers, what's interesting, there's a lot of things that happen in the spring. A lot of fish are moving through these places, and they overlap. So that actually the salmon smolts, and there are, I think, on occasion Atlantic salmon in this system, migrate out at the same time the smelts are coming in, and then the alewives are coming in, and the little baby eels, the elvers are coming in, and those nets are set up there, and DMR institute a rule where they have to put excluders so only elvers go through and not salmon. So it's really driven by the endangered salmon. So they want to be catching those salmon coming out of, say, the Narragansett River, where they settle out of those nets as well. But my son and I were fishing for trout here, and our house, we live right here, with the I. So it's a great place to live, and there's a lot of fish to see. And we caught, actually, my son and I caught 2 salmon smolts, headed out to sea. Salmon haven't been documented in this system for a very long time, and I think it's people aren't looking, or they don't know what they're looking at when they see them. When I started as a biologist in the early 80s, we electrofished the stream, and I remember my supervisor saying occasionally there's an Atlantic salmon, a sea-run salmon will spawn in here and overlap with the landlocked salmon that come out of Donnell Pond. So we can go out now and look at some of the places that we'd like to investigate, some findings this spring. So I just mentioned that these 2 streams have extremely important smelt lines. I would say like of national significance. And then you get to, right, so this is the South Bay Rail, which is right out here, that runs all the way along Shore Road. And these are the culvert surveys that were done last year. And this culvert right here was found to be a barrier to fish, which we had documented the year before, actually brook trout. And I didn't mention the sea-run brook trout, but there are sea-run brook trout that run up these systems as well. And we observed a bunch, maybe as many as a dozen little sea-run brook trout below that impassable culvert. And then we documented smelts there the last 2 years. And then we talked with the local old-timers, and they said, it's always been smelts there. And you will probably find smelts in this stream, right here, unnamed stream, but we haven't looked at that one yet. So that's on the to-do list for next year. This year, by the way, was the latest smelt run ever documented. There were fish still spawning last week in Cobscook and Jonesboro. They were documented there. Before I forget, while I'm on that, part of our citizen science is turning up some other really cool information, like other fish species that have never been seen here before. So this year we documented a young kid who is really just very excited. He's a commercial fisherman. His whole family is commercial fishermen. They go out smelting all the time. And he called me and said, I saw this really weird fish. I don't know what it is. I said, by any chance did you take a picture? And he said, I gave it to my grandpa. I told him not to eat it, but he ate it. And then he gave the head to the chicken, so there's no evidence. I said, by any chance did you take a picture? He said, oh yeah, I did. So he texted me the picture, and it was a sea-run, it was a white perch, which is a close relative of a striped bass. But they're not known to exist in the coastal estuaries of eastern Maine, but in the coastal estuaries of southern New England, they're abundant. So, and we had been predicting this, that they would start to show up here. And this was the first evidence that we've seen of that. So it's pretty neat. This is not a little fish. This is about a 9 or 10 inch, and he said that there were many others there, or several others there that he saw. So that's really neat evidence coming from a local kid who was a dropout out of high school and really just crazy about his fishing. So this is a project site. We know that this culvert really should be replaced with an arch culvert with a natural bottom, stream bottom, rather than plastic or corrugated metal that fish can't really use. Open it up wider, put stones in there, and you've just got a natural stream essentially. So there are funds available to do this for towns now.
What does it cost Dwayne to do that?
That's a good question. It would probably be, I don't know, it would be a wild guess on my part, but probably somewhere around $5,000 or $6,000 at least to do that. It's a hot top, it's been tarred, it's hot top on there. This little stream here, actually the culvert survey missed this culvert right here. This is known as the stream of consciousness by the locals. So Jeff Earhart and Boots, Garrett live here, and
Chuck's over there.
Right.
Yeah.
Who runs the seaweed business that many of you know about. Well, there's a little stream that comes right through here as well, and we documented Smelts in that one as well. But this culvert needs to be surveyed, yeah.
Dwayne, isn't it generically replacing culverts properly costs 50% more, but then they stay, then they get more?
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So there's, the lousy culverts which tend to cost more money anyway. So the initial investment might be less, but if you do it right, the long-term payoffs are better. So, but with climate, and especially now in the day with these climate events that we're seeing more and more so, heavy rain, more of it, the culverts are really going to need to get bigger anyway. So rather than having them blowing out, washing out, and all that sediment going down stream, and having to go back and patch them, if you can do it right, which is what they call bank full width plus 20%. So you can look at a stream and you can say that's the average bank full width. Now we're going to go another 20%, we'll put an arch over it, and then you'll have, it'll pass the water that it needs to pass. It'll pass the fish too. So you're looking at salt marsh here and then mud flats. And now what we're going to do is go out and look at these mud flats a little more, because that tells you where the streams are. The streams aren't necessarily even on the topographic map, the streams that we're concerned about. So the topographic map has a blue line where there's this freshwater stream, but you might not, they're not all on the topographic maps. So
Just tell me where you want me to zoom in.
let's see. Mark and Lisa's place, is it right here?
Right there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tiny little stream that comes through here. I don't know, they haven't named it yet. Stream of consciousness is taken, so you have to come up with something. The tiny little stream comes down near the library. Lisa grew up right there.
Yeah, it's right there, it comes right down by the field.
Oh,
Right there on that wood lot.
This
Right
here,
there, that's it,
there,
yeah,
right.
no,
So you can
straight
trace
north.
this little thread across the mud flats, and there it is. And Mark documented Smelts here. It's never been documented before that little stream.
The stream is literally this wide. I couldn't fit a net in it, so I reached my hand in and I pulled out 4 smelts.
That's illegal.
If that were in Massachusetts, in this day and age, that would be, a wonderful, a tremendous find. Up here, it's not that unusual, but it's not documented, so it's good that we're documenting this. And if there were someone building a road here, they want to take into consideration that those smelts are probably spawning in this first little area, and maybe you can move your road off that or put in a proper culvert. So this is good for planning purposes. And yesterday we just had a very successful meeting with 2 landowners in Jonesboro who have these blown out culverts, and they've agreed to decommission them, take them right out, and then in the future put in a span bridge or something like that. So we go back out again. Someone's going to have to watch the time because I don't know how much time you want to spend looking
It's
at.
Stay interesting.
Okay. I'll stay. So here's the school, the old school. I don't know if anybody in the room ever went to that school.
Yes.
All right. I met a woman who graduated high school there the other night at the Historical Society meeting. And that little stream right here behind it is a frequented little stream in the spring by local people fishing for smelts. And I met a father who was getting ready to bring his young kids out there. It's very easy to get to. This spring I met him and he was a little frustrated. I said, well, have you been to Card Mill Street yet? He said, no, and he followed me over. And he was so excited because there were so many smelts. And he brought the kids back there the next night again. So it's, you know, places like that are important. And there's some numbers of them around the bay that we'd like to have people adopt or go in and look at. We'll come out further. So that one has the old green visitation dot on it. As you can see, our data isn't lining up, so we get a little issue with.
Oh, this is supposed to be there?
I think that's, yeah, I think it just wasn't placed properly. So yes, light, eggs observed, yes, light, smelt observed, no on that particular day. But this is another problem culvert. This isn't a town road, so the other one we were looking at, South Bay, is a town road. This is a state highway. So in that case, Friends of Taunton Bay, Downeast Salmon Federation, we could work together. We could go to DOT and say, where is this on your priority list? How many culverts are there in the coast of Maine that are any higher priority than one with, you know, a population of smelts not connected? So that's what we observed this year was smelts down below that. It crosses diagonally across the highway, so it's a little bit longer than usual, and it's just not in the right dimensions and so on. The fish are battling to try to get up through it. So it would be a nice one to see replaced, and I think you can see the population of smelts rebound pretty quickly there. Egypt stream, if we keep going that away. So that's Egypt stream there. If you click that green box, what's it say?
Well, we're going to move it down so we can see all the text.
No longer supports spawning. Egypt stream. This is the place of the famed 1 pound smelts that Steve Karen
Used to be shacks, smelt shacks all over the ice, right there, entering into that, in the 1940s.
And I think people have forgotten that there's smelts there because what we observed this year were thousands of smelts there. So the state ranks as no longer support smelts, and by putting a little effort in, and if you could off-click that.
And do the red one?
If we zoom in a little bit, this is a beautiful spot. If you look upstream when you cross the road, you see this little gorge, and the stream's dropping into tide water right there. Just right here, so you can see that little gorge. And we went in there. If you go to the end of the guardrail here, there's a spot where you can park, and there's a trail that goes right in. And then if you walk upstream, we found hundreds and hundreds of smelt bodies there, chopped in half by predators. And probably mink and otter, raccoons and birds and everybody else was in there. So highly productive, ecologically significant location that at a very important time of year when these birds are trying to hatch eggs and so on. Yes?
I have two questions. One, how do you define spring? Is it usually the month of April, or is it March, or is it a long period of time? That's only one question.
Right, yeah, so We didn't know, a few years back, about 10 years back, the question started, there was a lot of concern about, oh, there's a coastwide decline, we're going to have to shut down the smelt fishery. And we went down to Augusta because what we were observing in eastern Maine was not a decline. In fact, we've done some restoration projects that we saw the population go up, so they said, so prove it. If you don't want us to close it, prove it. And we did. But what we did in the process was find out when these fish were actually moving. So we set nets and so on, talked to the fishermen. Fish are beginning to spawn in March. And they're spawning all the way up through, as we discovered this year, to the first week of July in some years. So spring for smelt runs from March until July, I would say. That's the spawning season. But you start to see them in, if the Knobscots call April the smelt moon, then there's some significance to that, at least historically. Whether that's shifted any, I don't know. And then the second question.
Second question.
Yeah.
You said that they come back and spawn in the second year.
That's right.
So, have any studies shown does the same smelt need to go try and find the same stream, or is it being?
No, that's a good question too. There's not the affinity to a particular stream like a salmon would have.
Yeah.
So salmon are river specific almost, but there's some stray. Excuse me, but with smelt they tend to move around more. However, they'll be within a region. So you saw the isolation, say, of Cobscook Bay, that whole population. It's like what we call meta-population. They're not specific only to that stream, but they move between streams. And there's some straying outside of that as well. And what happens, I think, is that the males tend to stay right longer, so that they can often, what you see later in the season is fewer females, but all the males are still there. So they're hanging in there waiting.
Is this despite a bad culvert, or is this culvert?
Now, that all seems fine from what I can tell. I think that the road here is fine, and this passage up through there, they get to a point where there's a natural ledge. And I traced this all the way up through, and it grades into a couple of branches, and there's some natural ledges that they can't get past. However, this year, because of after that crazy winter we had, with all the snow, we expected a big runoff, and it just went slowly, and then it went into like a drought almost. And the fish can go places, depending on water flow, they can go in different places. So year to year, it might be different how far upstream they go. So in a high freshet year, they may not only go a little ways, they just can't battle against it. But in a low flow year, and we had this again with another young lobster fisherman in Harrington, observed some fish way up the Harrington River where I had never known them to be. And I lived there for 20 years, so I've watched it pretty closely. Next. Oh, no. Next location. Down here, there's a couple of streams that. Yeah. Okay. So these white dots that we put on here are places yet to be visited, and these are the things that we can work with the Friends of Taunton Bay next spring, or if any of you happen to live there or know someone or something. So this one here, that's a pretty good sized stream. I don't know, but as I look at the aerial photography, I notice some heavy wood cutting right here.
I think Joe Barada.
Oh yeah, property. Yep. Well, it'd be good to know then. But with the aerial photography, and they updated it so frequently, you can actually see landscape change over time. And when you see heavy wood cutting, say, there are places around the watershed where you can see that. Excuse me. Or if we know, for instance, that a subdivision was going to go in and work with the planners and say, well, here's something that you might want to consider. So here's a few white dots that we put on the map saying these are places that we think we want to go next year. So
down here, is there anything to discuss?
Yeah, there is, and it didn't get on the map, actually, the stream right outside the door. This Gordon's, I don't know what it's called. But historically, talking with the town clerk who grew up right here, she said this used to be teeming with smelts, and then it stopped. In the last couple of years, we hadn't observed anything. I did find a few smelt eggs this spring in this brook. Yeah, and it's very steep. I think what happens in this case is it has to be a really big tide because there's a ledge right at the head of tide. And on a really big tide and the right conditions, they may shoot up here and may be spawning. So we're sitting right here. And that little stream there is important.
And there's a good culvert.
Yeah.
It's an old granite box culvert, but they built them right.
Yeah. So the old culverts up here by the road look pretty good. And the smelt may not even make it up that far. I think there may be an impassable natural ledge right in here. So that's the smelt story. And before we go into more discussion, I just want to say that that's only one of the species, and they overlap. So I mentioned sea run brook trout, Atlantic salmon, tomcod, whether they're, of course, you have the alewives, the blueback herring, the shad, in sturgeon, historically perhaps, and maybe even currently could come here. Atlantic herring maybe up into the bay, but not up into the fresh water. So those are, the sea run brook trout are particularly interesting. There's something called the Sea Run Brook Trout Coalition. Again, this is a species that was really important historically and from Long Island, where you have these sand and gravel deposits, ice age sand and gravel deposits, or during the last glacial period. There's a lot of cold water stored in those aquifers below the sand and gravel deposits. So places like Long Island, Cape Cod still have this cold groundwater that bleeds out in these streams, like we have here, say, at the head of Hog Bay, where there's a sand and gravel blueberry land there. A lot of cold water, and that will sustain trout through, especially as we go into climate change scenarios that we're thinking we're involved in now. Cold water refuge for these fish during the critical periods. So the temperature spikes to 100 degrees, say, for a week. Those fish are going to migrate out of the warm water into these springs. And if you can protect those springs and keep them clean and so on, the fish will survive that period, and then they can redisperse afterwards. So these culverts are important from that sense that I told you about the dozen little brook trout below that one culvert. If they can get up through that into a spring just for, say, weeks, maybe as little as a week, they'll survive to live and reproduce. So one of the things that we've talked with your intern about is contacting Inland Fish and Wildlife, who have been doing a brook trout survey of the whole state to see what they've done in this watershed. So, for instance, I know Egypt Stream has brook trout. Johnny's Brook is a very good brook trout stream, Hard Mill. But then there are some smaller ones where it would be good to know, are they present at all, and just to have them on the list as an inventory, so to speak. And then the tomcod, they come into the very same areas as smelt in the swamp, but instead of being a spring runner, they are at the winter solstice, right around Christmas. You can bet on it. So, and if you go out and look, you'll find them, and I've done that. So, right in the very same spot the smelts were at Cardinal Stream, if you go out December 21st with your hip boots and your flashlight and go through the snow, you will find these beautiful little fish, you know, ranging from this to that, marbly purple, a codfish that spawns in fresh water at Christmas. And there were huge numbers of people that fished those up until about 30 years ago, and people lost interest. So there's a retired game warden who lives who's about to move there, who spent his life here. And he said, oh yeah, years ago everybody was out there. at right around Christmas, I'm caught fishing. And I've been going around and I've seen footprints in 1 or 2 places. And I only know 1 or 2 people that even pay attention to it. So it's, and I've talked with the Marine Patrol wardens and they've all said, no, nobody's. So it's a kind of a lost species in a sense, but documenting it can be a lot of fun. What I've done is built these little minnow traps and put them in the stream, and they have to get upstream to get into the fresh water so you can actually trap them. It's like the nets I showed. So I think that's about it. If there is a question.
Yeah, question is, at the beginning you talked about the map of where the smelt used to be and where they are now. Have you any information on across the border in Canada and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia as to whether they still have large populations of smelt and whether they're doing any research up there?
Yeah, they are doing research up there. In fact, there's been smelt meetings where people come from all over the place just to talk about smelts, and I've been there, held one in Portland a few years ago. There are people out of the St. Lawrence watershed and Gulf of St. Lawrence and all over the place that came to that. And there's a, if you go to the store and you are looking to buy smelts, you can go to Maine Shellfish, for instance, in Ellsworth. They import smelts from the Miramichi River. They're probably the biggest source of smelts coming into the U.S. or being eaten in the U.S. right now are coming out of the Miramichi up in New Brunswick. And there's a massive population of smelts there still, and they net them in the winter. And they're tiny. The fish that they harvest, they're all gutted and the heads are off, and they're frozen, probably flash frozen, put in these bags, and they're tiny little fish like that. But they have huge, huge numbers there in places, and in other places I think that there's been declines. And then I know that there's been some declines in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There was a really cool research project they did. They're catching a lot of smelts, but they're not seeing them run up the streams that they used to run in. And they were trying to figure out, well, what, they're coming from somewhere. Where are they coming from? Some of the rivers to the north shore of St. Lawrence still have runs. The south shore, not so much. And they started looking at where are these fish coming from on the south shore. They cut out metal pieces of aluminum plate, put them on a string of rope like a trawl, and set them with buoys out in shallow areas in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So they set them down on the bottom, and they go out and pick them up once a week or every few days and look for smelt eggs. And that's how they located a large population of smelt spawning out in what shoal areas. But it's fresh water, so I think it's tidal, but it's fresh. So there's so much fresh water coming down, so much salt water coming in that the tide. It's like sort of like Miramichi Bay, where the Androscoggin and Kennebec come together. It's pushed back, so it's intertidal, but it's fresh water. So the smelts go way up the Kennebec River to spawn in Augusta in that area. So there's research going on up there. And I think the Gulf, the Bay of Fundy and the lower, the rivers of the lower Nova Scotia are in similar condition to what we see here. So I think it's somewhat spotty where they are and where they aren't. I'm not 100% sure of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.